by this time. Yes, let's get started. Jai Baba.
Jai
Jai Baba. The seven realities: existence, love, sacrifice, renunciation, knowledge, control, and surrender. Baba says, I give no importance to creed, dogma, caste, or the performance of religious ceremonies and rites, but to the understanding of the following seven realities. The only real existence is that of the one and only God, who is the self in every finite self. The only real love is the love for this infinity God, which arouses an intense longing to see, know, and become one with its truth, God. The only real sacrifice is that in which, in pursuance of this love, all things, body, mind, position, welfare, and even life itself are sacrificed. The only real renunciation is that which abandons, even in the midst of worldly duties, all selfish thoughts and desires. The only real knowledge is the knowledge that God is the inner dweller in good people and in so called bad, insane, and in so called sinner. This knowledge requires you to help all equally as circumstances demand, without expectations of reward, when compelled to take part in a dispute, to act without the slightest trace of enmity or hatred, to try to make others happy with brotherly or sisterly feeling for each other, each one, and to harm no one in thought, word, or deed, not even those who harm you. Is that all? The only real control is the discipline of the senses to abstain from indulgence of low desires, which alone ensures absolute purity of character. The only real surrender is that in which poise is undisturbed by any adverse circumstance, and the individual, amidst every kind of hardship, is resigned with perfect calm to the will of God. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai.
Meher Baba ki jai. So we did stages of the path yesterday. Any discussions on that? Any questions on that before we get started? We spent a lot of time understanding the planes. We went on a journey to discover who's on which plane, at least not those on this call, but we were trying to imagine and try to map that out. And I hope it was useful. It was a good exercise. Now we can continue further and go to arriving at self-knowledge. Any insights and questions from stages, the 7 stations, before we go? So I think the stations analogy is a good one. And it also goes well with the analogy of the journey itself. So journey, station, experiences on the station. To Sanjay's point, all the food, Indian railways. That's what distinguishes each of the stations, right?
Yeah.
Good. So if there's nothing else, we will continue into the next stage, into the next chapter, arriving at self-knowledge. Physical page number is 135. Progress towards self-knowledge, gradual and imperceptible. When the time is right, the advancement of a person towards self-knowledge comes about as naturally as the physical body of a child grows into full-fledged form. The growth of the physical body is worked out by the operation of natural laws, and the progress of the aspirant towards self-knowledge is worked out by the operation of spiritual laws pertaining to the transformation and emancipation of consciousness. The physical body of a child grows very gradually and almost imperceptibly, and the same is true of the spiritual progress of a person once he has entered the path. The child does not know how its physical body grows. In the same way, the aspirant also is often oblivious of the law by which he makes headway toward the destination of his spiritual progress. The aspirant is generally conscious of the manner in which he has been responding to the diverse situations in life, but rarely conscious of the manner in which he makes progress towards self knowledge. Without consciously knowing it, the aspirant is gradually arriving at self knowledge by traversing the inner path through his joys and sorrows, his happiness and suffering, his successes and failures, his efforts and rest, and through his moments of clear perception and harmonized will, as well as the moments of confusion and conflict. These are the manifestations of the diverse sanskaras that he has brought from the past, and the aspirant forges his way towards self knowledge through the tangles of these sanskaras, like the traveler threading his way through a wild and thick forest. Scope of consciousness and its working. Human consciousness might be compared to a flashlight that reveals the existence and the nature of things. The province illuminated by this flashlight is defined by the medium through which it works. Just as a person confined to a boat can wander anywhere on the surface of the water, but can have no access to remote places on land or in the air. The actual working of the flashlight of consciousness is determined by the accumulated sanskaras, just as the course of the rivulets flowing down a mountain is determined by the channels created by the natural contours of the mountain. Average person, yeah.
Can we have some small discussion on consciousness from
Sure.
all of us?
I like this sentence. It vanished now. I don't know where to read it.
Okay.
Human consciousness might be compared to a flashlight that reveals the existence and the nature of things. It's so very true, you know. It's once you understand things, your consciousness reveals the hidden meanings of everything you see, which normally, if you're not progressing in spirituality, you don't see. Only when, and another thing that came to my mind is if Baba was not avatar, you know, he's such an intelligent man. He puts such profound things in such simplicities. It's like amazing. I would just die 200 times to meet him. That's all. Yeah, Baba.
Nomita
That
ji,
also he has
may I
defined it, no? Sorry, go ahead, Ashok.
sorry, Karthik. I should have asked. Nomita, no, what I was saying is that he still is around us, not in the physical or human. I mean, what I mean to say, not as a in the as a human being, but he is still around us. You just have to ask, and he will reveal, and he'll come to you.
Yeah, Jai Baba. So many Baba lovers talk about his magnetism and his aura and what it did to them, his physical presence. Sometimes I crave for that, you know. I wish I was alive at that time. But never mind, I'm sure he will reveal his magnetism without form also. I'm waiting, I'm waiting.
If you have
In that
revelation, will you see him in form or as formless?
I mean, I see him in my heart, you know. It's
No,
like
no,
a
no.
bolt. It's like a
Just a
bolt.
point. Just a pointed question.
Yeah, I see him. I see him here.
Yes.
See, once Baba wrote, Baba said to somebody, it was Billy Page from Australia. He was said to him, trying to see my physical form or anticipating to see my form is like trying to see a movie actors. We have a lot of, I want to see this Shah Rukh Khan, I want to see these people. But what are we going to do? Just a simple satisfaction. Oh, we have seen Shah Rukh Khan. But beyond that, nothing is there. More important is love for Baba. That is most important thing. That's the only thing we need to do. And
sorry.
this
Yeah, you were saying?
this flashlight reminds me of a famous Vedantic term, Yada Drusti Tada Sristi. Wherever you flash the light, that is where you see, right? That is where. And the Vedanta says, wherever you look, wherever you pay attention with your mind, that is where you are seeing and figuring out things, or analyzing or judging. All these things happen. The things that we don't see, we don't analyze or anything.
Another thing is analogy of a baby growing into an adult, and the transformation happens without him really realizing. That's very reassuring. I'm hopeful we are doing all this and something is changing inside. It gives me hope.
Correct. And another reassuring thing is that we all may have met him in physical form in our past lives.
Yes, I think I must have.
Yes.
That's what
you have.
Babaji says,
Another reassurance.
Yeah, Babaji confidently says, you all met, whoever became Baba lovers, you all met Baba. Maybe in the previous life, may not be this life.
Yes. Yeah.
It puts a seed now.
You echoed what I said. I said you echoed what I was thinking, that if you're born before 69, you might have met him. This is just speculation. It's true. It might be true.
Yeah. It's the same sound echoing everywhere. So, Jai Baba.
Mamaji had a point on consciousness. So, any specific observations from what we are reading? So, I'm trying to remember what is that other reference to the flashlight that is there in Discourses. Anybody can jump in. There is a analogy of the flashlight used to describe. Is it the planes? Is it? It's towards the end of the
You have
book.
to ask PhD doctor.
I am reminded of what Khalid had said a long time back on flashlight, that our flashlights are very small, so we are able to see only to the extent that our little flashlights are. That's something which I am reminded of. But our flashlights, what we have is basically where it is flashed. The province illuminated by the flashlight is defined by the medium through which it works, and depending on our sanskaras, that is written in the last sentence. Yeah, Baba. That's what our consciousness sees with the little flashlight that we have. Jai Baba.
Yeah. So the analogy is used constantly.
38.
Yeah, go ahead.
So basically, the state of fana or fanafila, or also the state of enlightenment, or I think that also the sudden enlightenment or awakening could be also could it also be? I think it can be compared with the flashlight, because you're moving up the path and you suddenly have a sudden discovery or a sudden revelation. Is that a right or the correct way to look at it?
Ashokji, flashlight I will see from a limited consciousness perspective. Not at that level, it will be thousands of suns illuminating together. So.
Okay, this is just a
correct.
Depends upon what battery you're using.
Baba, the way you can, I think you have to read the whole chapter to understand this
analogy
concept of flashlight of consciousness. Flashlight is an analogy for consciousness. And as you are going through the gross sphere of existence, subtle sphere, and mental sphere, you'll be using your gross consciousness, subtle consciousness, mental consciousness. And then once you reach the seventh plane, it's self-consciousness. So as you read the chapter, you'll understand the flashlight of consciousness is basically using all these different bodies, gross, subtle, mental. So when you're in the gross body, when you're using your gross body in the gross sphere of existence, your consciousness will be gross, the five sensations. Once you move to the subtle world, subtle sphere, when your impressions get converted to subtle impressions, then you're going to use your subtle body to experience the subtle sphere of existence. So you will read that in this chapter. Jai Baba.
Yeah, just as I was searching for that other reference to torchlight, you noticed how this analogy is repeated multiple times in the next few pages. So let's hold our horses. I think we may get a better understanding by the end of the read. This chapter, I
The
mean.
point that I wanted to bring it
Go
up
ahead.
was, am I audible? Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
As we know from God Speaks reading and partial or rudimentary understanding, that consciousness is 100% in the human body, human stage of evolution. But it is acting as a torchlight here. So it is actually a searchlight, but veiled by sanskaras, becoming a dim, small torchlight. So our efforts should be to make it a real searchlight, and that goes on from the gross to the subtle to the mental planes, and the path that we tread. So this consciousness is to visualize or understand that our consciousness is 100%, but we are unable to say visualize everything. That is the greatest handicap we have. That is the sanskaric load we have. How do we get out of that is our struggle. Jai Baba.
Mamaji, you said the torchlight. Do you mean flashlight?
Flashlight. Small flashlight. We start with a pocket small torch.
Okay.
Then we have a handheld one. Then we will have a bigger one where we use it in bigger ceremonies outside. Like that, we have to grow and then see the whole cosmos with a bright light.
In America, if I use torchlight for flashlight, they look at me, why is he using torchlight? Torchlight is the torch they use for the welding. They don't use the term flashlight for the blowtorch. Yes.
I didn't realize that. Yeah. Cool. So let's continue. Average person only conscious of gross world. In the case of an average person, the sphere of life and the stage of action are restricted to the gross world because in him, the flashlight of consciousness falls on the physical body and works through it. Being restricted to the medium of the gross body, he can be conscious of anything within the gross world but is unable to establish contact with the subtle or mental realities. The gross sphere thus constitutes the arena of the average individual, and all his activities and thoughts have a tendency to be directed toward the gross objects that are accessible to him. During this time, he remains unconscious of the subtle and the mental spheres of existence, since the flashlight of his consciousness cannot be focused through the medium of the subtle or the mental body. Identification with the physical body. At this stage, the soul is conscious of the gross world, but is completely ignorant of its own true nature. It identifies itself with the gross body on which the flashlight of consciousness falls, and this naturally becomes the base for all the activities within its range. The soul does not directly know itself through itself, but by means of the physical body. And since all the knowledge it can gather through the physical body points to the physical body itself as the center of activities, it knows itself as being the physical body, which in fact is only its instrument. The soul therefore imagines itself to be a man or woman, young or old, and takes upon itself the changes and limitations of the body. Identification with the subtle body. After several rounds of lives in the setting given by the gross world, the impressions connected with the gross world become weak through the long duration of the experience of opposites, like great happiness and intense suffering. The weakening of the impressions is the beginning of the spiritual awakening, which consists in the gradual withdrawal of the flashlight of consciousness from the allurements of the gross world. When this happens, the gross impressions become subtle, facilitating and inducing the soul's transference of the base of conscious functioning from the gross body to the subtle body. Now, the flashlight of consciousness falls on the subtle body and works through it as its medium, no longer working through the gross body. Therefore, the whole gross world drops from the consciousness of the soul and it becomes conscious only of the subtle world. The subtle sphere of existence now constitutes the context of its life, and the soul now considers itself to be the subtle body, which becomes and is seen to be the center of all its activities. Even when the soul has thus become subtle conscious, it remains ignorant of its own true nature, since it cannot know itself directly through itself, but only by means of the subtle body. I'll read that last line again. Even when the soul has thus become subtle conscious, it remains ignorant of its own true nature, since it cannot know itself directly through itself, but only by means of the subtle body. However, the change of the stage of action from the gross to the subtle sphere of existence is of considerable significance. In the subtle sphere, the conventional standards of the gross world are replaced by new standards that are nearer the truth, and a new mode of life is rendered possible by the dawning of new powers and a release of spiritual energy. Life in the subtle world is only a passing phase in the spiritual journey and is far from being the goal. But out of millions of gross conscious souls, only a rare one is capable of becoming subtle conscious. Impressions, that is a subtitle. So, identification.
One
mental
particular
body.
sentence in the first paragraph, the real one. The weakening of impressions is the beginning of spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
I think that's a very graphic sentence.
Yeah.
Weakening of impressions is the beginning of spiritual awakening. Okay.
Yeah.
Why didn't Baba use gross impressions? The weakening of the gross impressions is the beginning of the spiritual awakening. I wonder why he used general impressions.
No, we
I
need
think
to.
gross is number one, and after that, even subtle have to go. So I think.
I see. Yeah.
Subtle also has to go.
Any impressions?
Yeah.
Sorry, impressions.
Any impressions has to go. So.
Very good, Sanjay. Very good, Jai Baba.
Jai Baba, I think that spiritual evolution by definition starts when gross impressions are converted to subtle impressions. That is why I think that statement. Jai Baba. And also one more query I have here to the audience. Remember that Baba has talked about the 7,000 spiritual aspirants in the spiritual hierarchy. And interesting thing out here is he says out of 1 million, only a few rare ones will go into the subtle. And then later on, when you read about the mental, you'll also notice that he talks about out of the number of people, millions of people who are subtle conscious, only a rare one will go into the mental conscious aspect. So it kind of, I was wondering initially, I thought that only there are 7,000 people in the world who have gone from the gross impressions to subtle impressions into the spiritual involution. Because he has given the number 7,000, how many people are between planes, how many people are in certain planes, etc. So I was wondering, whether anybody has some inputs on that. Jai Baba.
That is what I am also thinking, Kama. I'm thinking people who are numbered in the involution plane from first plane to sixth plane are 7,000.
No, I think Kama's point is the spiritual involution progress limited to the 7,000, or is it more than that?
I don't know. See, he's very specific about 56 God realized people, and he said not more, not less. And if one drops off, the one in the sixth plane will get elevated to make sure the number is 56. He's very specific about that. But 7,000 number, he's not very specific. Then Baba likes to use 7,000.
No, he's very specific, right? So if you notice what I'm bringing up on the screen, we went through this yesterday as well. So he's very, very specific, right? And but this is the planes, right? So Kama, in the context of this, can you rephrase your question? Because you said initially you thought. You started your question with that. So can you
go to the previous page, the last paragraph, if you can read that. Yeah. Mayor Baba distributes the 7,000 members of the functioning hierarchy for a particular age in and between the 7 spiritual planes as follows. And then here you see the bifurcation of the 7,000 in the first plane, and also between the first and second, second and third, third and fourth, fourth and fifth, fifth and sixth, and sixth and seventh. He has given a general number 5,600. The number 56 is very prominent. But in the second plane, 666, third plane 558, but the fourth, fifth, and sixth plane, there are only 56 each. In the seventh plane, 3 Madzubs and 5 perfect masters. Now, when you go down, please go down. See, here it will tell you, so here it will show you that, there are always at all times 56 God-realized souls, and out of these 56, only 8 have public recognition. The 8 are the 5 perfect masters and the 3 which are included in the 7,000. So 56 minus 8, 48 are excluding the 7,000. The remaining 48 God-realized souls are not amongst the functioning spiritual hierarchy of 7,000 members. They remain aloof and people are not cognizant of their divinity, though all 48 have the same experience and enjoy the same state. So the point here is, apart from understanding this 7,000 number, how they are distributed between the different planes, the question comes here that when we are reading this particular chapter now, where it says that out of million, a few will become subconscious, and out of a million of subconscious, a few will become. So maybe the functional hierarchy is something that is predetermined. Who are the subconscious? Because we know that first to fourth plane is the subtle planes, and fifth and sixth is mental planes. Of course, 1 and 4 are overlaps, gross and subtle and mental, the fourth one. So we know that when Baba is talking about subtle conscious souls, which means these souls are operating between the first and fourth, and the mental conscious souls will be in the fifth and sixth. So, which means that he's talking about millions of subtle conscious souls and millions of mental conscious souls. So out of these millions of subtle conscious souls, a few of them will be in the spiritual hierarchy. It's like a subset of that. So this is what I kind of understood from this, trying to interrelate both these God Speaks 7,000 and the chapter we are reading. Jai Baba. I hope I'm making sense.
Where did you see millions of people in the?
Yeah, that is exactly my question. So I understand the functioning hierarchy. The use of the term functioning hierarchy seems to suggest that they are a subset. But where did you get the millions from?
No, we read now,
The
just now.
chapter, no, you just now read out of the millions of gross conscious cells, a few rare ones will become subtle conscious. And then when you read about the subtle to the mental, when subtle conscious souls become mental conscious, you will read that out of a millions of subtle conscious, you will see.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yes,
Perfect.
yes,
Okay.
yes. That's the connection.
Fine. That's a good catch. That settles it then. So you can be one among the millions in the subtle conscious souls, but obviously that does not mean that you're part of the 7,000 hierarchy. And both are supported by evidence. One in this chapter in Discourses, and the other the breakup for the 7,000 in God Speaks. Is that a good summary?
Yes.
Yeah, you can say we are probably veiled. The people who are not in the planes, the 7,000 functional spiritual hierarchy, which means they have certain functions which probably they know, but they are not aware of the different planes or something like that. They're just performing those functions in those planes. But the rest of the spiritual aspirants in the subtle planes and the mental planes are probably going veiled. They don't know about it. They're probably there.
Could you help me? Where did you find this connection, Kama or Karthik? Millions.
Okay.
I'm still confused about the millions.
No, you can read it, Karthik. Repeat it.
Yeah, I'm just coming in. Yeah. But out of the millions of gross conscious souls, only a rare one is capable of becoming subtle conscious. And then I believe he has further seen below, when we go down, we will see the same transition and a use of the word millions for subtle to mental.
Where did you see that? Where did you see that?
I didn't read it. That's
I
what
trust
he
you.
says.
I trust you, but I'm just.
No, I trusted Kama too. Out of millions of subtle conscious souls, and only a rare one can establish contact with the mental sphere. There it is. So that proves there are millions of subtle conscious, but there is a functioning hierarchy that's limited to 7,000. Both are factual.
So if I may ask, the functional hierarchy is not veiled, but the others are all veiled.
That's a supposition, yes. That's a good, that's fairly reasonable assumption.
Jai Baba.
This is quite confusing. Out of millions of subtle conscious souls, only a rare one can establish conscious contact with the mental sphere of existence.
Let's face it, though the words here are millions of gross conscious souls, the first reference, out of the millions of gross conscious, there's more than millions, right? There's billions of gross conscious souls, because everybody in the human form is gross conscious to start with. So as we speak, there are 7+ billion gross conscious souls. So out of that, a rare one. So the rare could end up, through that filter, could be millions.
Yeah,
it's just a lower
billions
number,
here,
but then out of the 7 billion, you might have. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Sanjay.
Yeah, millions here is coming as a metaphor, actually, not in the count of God Speaks page. Actually.
Yeah, that's what I feel.
Millions, is very rare. That's just the explanation. It's not in one time zone or at one time or
not a round number.
That could be. Yes.
It could be in hundreds of years. So this happens.
Yeah,
it's very rare.
Last time when we talked about backbiting, and Baba mentioned, if you do backbiting, you will be stuck in the grass plane for millions of years. And he said, once you become a human being, you have 84 lakhs before you step into the higher consciousness. So it doesn't make sense. Then that is our mindset. That mind goes. So Baba, I think, as Sanjay said, uses as a metaphor, not a. Yeah.
So if you're saying that, are you suggesting that there are only 7,000? Because it has to be either or, right? So either we go with the supposition that there are millions of. Okay.
So 7,000 number is at any. It's like a snapshot today, just at this moment. That is 7,000.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, it's like a snapshot status on the as on,
Yeah.
as of now. Yeah.
See, Jay Baba, I can give you one
Ramanujan?
clarification. I read long time ago when I was reading Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. He said it very clearly. Out of millions of people, one wants to know about God. Out of millions of people who want to know God, one knows how to go about it. Out of the million of those, the how to go about it, one actually implements it, goes through it. And out of the million who actually starts working on their spiritual emancipation, one becomes God realized. So I think that, there's another chapter here in page number 276, the state of the man God. It's on the first paragraph, 276. It says, of all the subjects of human study, God is the most meaningful. But purely theoretical study of God does not take the aspirant very far toward the real purpose of human life. Though it is always better to study God than to be completely ignorant of his existence. To seek God intellectually is infinitely better than to be merely a skeptic or an agnostic. And it is decidedly better to feel God than to study him through the intellect. Though even feeling for God is less important than the actual experience of God. However, even the experience of God does not yield the true nature of divinity because God as the object of experience remains different from and external to the aspirant. The true nature of God is known to the aspirant only when he attains unity with God by losing himself in his being. Thus, it is better to study God than to be ignorant of him. It is better to feel God than to study him. It is better to experience God than to feel God. And it is better to become God than to experience it. So if you look at these categories, you can see the whole billions of people can be distributed in all these different categories as per the Ramakrishna Paramahamsa syndrome of this. So I think it makes sense, out of 7 billion people, I'd said around 700,000 or 10 lakh people, 0.01% are aware of Baba, because he has not manifested publicly. Jai Baba.
One more point we can add to this, Kama, is that in this scale of the time, sense of time that we are having, the same soul's Janmantra or the reappearance so many times also manifolds into a bigger number, so that these millions have a meaning there also. So when we say 84 lakh times, we need to be born here to get realizations. That means in each life, there will be millions of people available. So for count. So that way, this keeps on expanding. There is no limit for the numbers that you can think of.
Okay, I am a simple man. So I am a simple man. So am I aiming to get to the 7,000 or is there hope for being in the millions?
No,
You're
I
At a
already
point in time, I'm
told
talking in the context of the time
no.
of my birth. Okay.
As an
Karthik, you're already
aspirant,
in the planes. Don't worry
Yeah,
about it.
right. Yeah,
Karthik,
but I've not
I
been
have
to an airport
already
in a year.
told that I aspire to be one of the 5.
Yeah,
So
that's
there is no
So
need for
Karthik,
any.
Karthik, don't worry. Family will get the preference. You will be pulled in
okay.
by
Jeppat is
Mamaji.
take care of it.
See, frankly, it has nothing to do with the planes and all this journey and all that. The only thing that mattered is Manonash, annihilation of the ego, and it's about self-awareness. It's plain and simple. I think if you listen to the 10-day Vipassana meditation discourses, I think everything about God speaks and discourses will become very clear. This is just a divine theme, how to play the game, what happens during this game. But bottom line is, if we can focus on the ego and dissolve that, I think that is the only goal, real goal. Yeah, Baba.
So these
I have,
millions of, sorry,
Yes,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I just have a simple question. Has this quantity of 7 lakh aspirants, is it a
Rough number. Rough number. Yeah,
it's
he
a
has
rough
said
number? Okay.
many times,
It's a rough
many
number.
times, but it's a rough number. Yeah.
Okay,
But
okay.
fairly supported by evidence, right? Andhra, US, India, total should be around that.
It was just a theoretical question, but it's fine.
Yeah,
Fine.
Soma,
So-
go ahead.
Yeah. So when we speak about the millions of souls, we are talking about these millions of souls who are in the gross plane. What about in body? There must be millions who are also not in body, but in these planes.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
That's what we are talking about.
That's why
The
this
people on
number
the planes
gets,
are in body, right? People on the plane, these 7,000 people are
Yes,
in
yes.
body. Yeah.
These 7,000 are in body, but millions will be also out of body.
No, no, no. There's nothing like out
I-
of body. We are talking
Correct.
about the existing human souls living on planet Earth. Out of 7 to 8 billion people now living on planet Earth, there will be
So
56 God-realized souls, and there will be
in the
7,000
plane, yes.
functioning spiritual hierarchy, and there will be millions of souls who are probably in the subtle sphere of existence in any of the four subtle planes, or millions of souls could be in the mental sphere of existence. So that's the gist of the chapter.
So specifically, you're talking about people who are in body, not
Yes,
people who
absolutely.
have dropped their body.
No.
no,
Thank you.
I think, Soba, what we can think in these lines is only a small percentage of souls are in the astral world, and they cross over to either the gross or subtle or whatever it is. But once they cross over, they have a body. They have a gross body. They may not be conscious of the gross body. Those who are in the subtle plane, they have a gross body, but they are not conscious of the gross body. Those who are in the mental plane, they are not conscious of the subtle as well as gross. They are only conscious of the mental. But all of them have a gross body. Only souls which are in a temporary small phase in the astral world,
Temporary. Yes.
they don't have a body. That is my understanding. I hope I am correct.
I agree with that understanding. I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
as
go ahead.
Dogma said, it's correct. Irrespective of whether you are in the gross plane of existence, subtle plane of existence, or mental sphere of existence, all those human beings in any of those three spheres will use that particular body, gross, subtle, or mental body, but they will have all the three bodies.
Yes.
It is only how you directly use one particular body and indirectly use the other two bodies, depending on the sphere of existence you are existing. Yeah.
Yes.
This is given in God Speaks. When you read God Speaks, it's a little confusing, I know, because Baba says when you're in the gross sphere, you will use your gross body directly, but you're using your subtle and mental body indirectly, and vice versa for all the other spheres. Yeah, Baba.
Jai Baba.
Okay.
Kama, I have one more question. Can I just ask?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, there is a mention somewhere, I think, in discourses that archangels or angels, they have to come into into a human form to attain realization, self-realization or God realization. So I think from that we can construe that being in the body is probably a precondition. Could anybody clarify this?
Yes, you're correct. It's mandatory. It's very clear that Baba said you have to take human form to get God realization or nirvana. That's correct.
I think even in Hindu way of thinking also, any Devata or Gandharva, all of them need to come to the human sphere to get realization. Otherwise, their sphere of activity is only a temporary phase.
Thank you, Kama, Mamaji.
Okay. Let's continue. I'll reread the identification with mental body. Impressions connected with the subtle world get worn out in turn. Wait a second. This is where I was, right? Yes. Identification with mental body. Impressions connected with the subtle world get worn out in turn through, for instance, some forms of penance or yoga. This facilitates and brings about a further withdrawal of consciousness inwardly, whereby the flashlight of consciousness comes to be focused on the mental body and begins to function through it. The severance of conscious connection with the subtle and gross bodies means that the gross and subtle spheres of existence become completely excluded from the scope of consciousness. The soul is now conscious of the mental world, which affords deeper possibilities for spiritual understanding and a clearer perception of the ultimate truth. In this new setting of the mental sphere, the soul enjoys continuous inspiration, deep insight, and unfailing intuition, and it is in direct contact with spiritual reality. Although it is in direct contact with God, the soul does not see itself as God, since it cannot know itself directly through itself, but only through the medium of the individual mind. It knows itself by means of the individual mind and considers itself to be the individual mind, for it sees the individual mind as being the base and the center of all its activities. Although the soul is now much closer to God than in the gross or subtle spheres, it is still enclosed in the world of shadow, and it continues to feel separate from God owing to the veil created by the impressions connected with the mental sphere. The flashlight of consciousness is functioning through the limitation of the individual mind and does not therefore yield the knowledge of the soul as it is in itself. Though the soul has not yet realized itself as being God, its life in the mental sphere of existence constitutes a tremendous advance beyond the state of the subtle sphere. Out of millions of subtle conscious souls, only a rare one can establish conscious contact with the mental sphere of existence. Need for a master. It is possible for an aspirant to rise to the mental sphere of existence through his own unaided efforts. But dropping the mental body amounts to the surrenderance of individual existence. This last and all-important step cannot be taken except through the help of a perfect master who is himself God-realized. Out of millions of souls who are conscious of the mental sphere, only a rare one can withdraw the flashlight of consciousness from the individual mind. Such withdrawal implies the complete vanishing of the last traces of the impressions connected with the mental life of the soul. When the flashlight of consciousness is no longer centered upon any of the three bodies, it serves the purpose of reflecting the true nature of the soul. Direct self-knowledge. The soul now has direct knowledge of itself without. Ashok, do you want to ask a question?
I'm done. I am done. I'm done. Sorry. I have to just.
Okay. I rarely see that, so please jump in and talk. I don't see that. Yeah, I don't pay attention to that. Direct self-knowledge is the subtitle. The soul now has direct knowledge of itself without being dependent upon any medium, seeing itself not as some finite body, but as infinite God, and knowing itself to be the only reality. In this major crisis in the life of the soul, there is a complete severance of connections with all three bodies. Since consciousness of the different spheres of existence is directly dependent upon the corresponding bodies, the soul is now entirely oblivious of the whole universe. The flashlight of consciousness is no longer focused upon anything foreign or external, but is turned upon the soul itself. The soul is now truly self-conscious and has arrived at self-knowledge. false self-knowledge, a temporary substitute. The process of arriving at self-knowledge throughout the three spheres of existence is attended by the acquisition of false self-knowledge, consisting in identification with the gross or the subtle or the mental body according to the stage of the process. This is due to the initial purpose of creation, which is to make the soul self-conscious. The soul cannot have true self-knowledge except at the end of the spiritual journey, and all the intermediate forms of false self-knowledge are, as it were, temporary substitutes for true self-knowledge. They are mistakes necessary in the attempt to arrive at true self-knowledge. So these are some important lines here.
The last line is, they are mistakes necessary in the attempt to arrive at.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think he's making a very important point here that these suppositions and assumptions are unavoidable and necessary, which is interesting.
Basically, saying inevitable. Karthik, just one more question. That the two paragraphs before this, the first line talks about unfailing intuition. And that's also a profound line. That is the one before
The
need for a master.
setting, in the new setting, that is page 138, first paragraph. In the new setting of mental sphere, the soul enjoys continuous inspiration, deep insight, and unfailing intuition.
Okay. Since the flashlight, I'll continue reading. Since the flashlight of consciousness is turned throughout the journey toward the objects of the environment and not upon the soul itself, the soul has a tendency to become so engrossed in these objects that it is almost completely oblivious of its own existence and nature. This danger of utter and unrelieved self-forgetfulness is counterbalanced by the self-affirmation of the soul by means of the three bodies, which happen to be used as the focal points of the flashlight of consciousness. Thus, the soul knows itself as its own bodies and knows other souls as their bodies, thereby sustaining a world of duality where there is sex, competition, aggression, jealousy, mutual fear, and self-centered exclusive ambition. Hence, self-knowledge of the soul by means of any external sign is a source of untold confusion, complication, and entanglement.
The outcome of the necessary mistakes that have been made.
Yeah, wrong identification. Pumpkin story. The form of ignorance may be illustrated by means of the famous pumpkin story referred to by the Persian poet Jami in one of his couplets. Once upon a time, there was an absent-minded man who had no equal in forgetting things, even his own identity. He had an intelligent and trusted friend who wanted to help him to remember himself. This friend attached a pumpkin to his neck and said, "Now listen, old man, one day you might completely lose yourself and not know who you are. Therefore, as a sign, I tie this pumpkin around your neck so that every morning when you wake up, you will see the pumpkin and know it is you who are there." Every day, the absent-minded man saw the pumpkin upon waking in the morning and said to himself, "I am not lost." After some time, when he had become used to self-identification through the pumpkin, the friend asked a stranger to remain with the absent-minded man take the pumpkin from his neck during his sleep and tie it around his own neck. The stranger did this, and when the absent minded man woke up in the morning, he did not see the pumpkin around his neck. So he said to himself, I am lost. Then he saw the pumpkin on the other man's neck and said to him, You are me. But then who am I? Analogy made explicit. This pumpkin story offers an analogy to the different forms of false self knowledge growing from identification with one of the bodies. To know oneself as the body is like knowing oneself by means of the pumpkin. The disturbance caused by ceasing to identify with the gross, subtle, or mental body is comparable to the confusion of the absent minded man when he could no longer see the pumpkin around his own neck. The beginnings of a dissolution of the sense of duality are equivalent to the man's identification of himself as the stranger who wore his pumpkin. Further, if the absent minded man in the story were to learn to know himself through himself, independently of any external sign, his self knowledge would be comparable to the true self knowledge of the soul, which, after ceasing to identify with the three bodies, knows itself to be none other than infinite God. Arriving at self knowledge is the very goal of creation. Okay, it's the end of the chapter. Okay, any thoughts? The flashlight, is it clear? The analogy, and are we in the millions making the progress? Are we in the 7,000? Are we getting to the 7,000? Mamaji knows where he wants to get to. The rest, I think, are in.
No, the flashlight, as we started, we thought the flashlight is beaming away from us, but actually the flashlight is beaming inside, going deeper and deeper inside us.
Correct. Good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
Because I was imagining a person going through a long cave with a flashlight. So he sees a small area in front of him and then moves ahead. And he may see so many things there. And then as he moves away from that to another area, he forgets about the things that he has seen earlier and then keeps his concentration on the other area. But the whole process is done by the same person. So that is how we have this gross body and the subtle and the mental together, and we keep moving. But our concentration may have to shift from the gross to the subtle, from there to the mental, but carrying all through all three bodies together.
Sure.
The takeaway for me was, I think, in a humorous sense, I was under the impression that there are only 7,000 human beings who are in the plane of involution, between first plane to the sixth plane. But this chapter reveals to you that, out of millions of gross conscious souls, rare, and then out of millions of subtle conscious, so there is hope for everybody. I think, that it's more than the 7,000 that I thought about. So there are millions of people who are basically between the first plane and the sixth plane before they attain nirvana or nirvikalpa samadhi.
Yes.
That is not how I understood.
No, I'm not going to do that.
As Sanjay ji said, that is just a metaphor that Baba used.
No, there is a
I
functional
still think it is
hierarchy. It's
7,000
very
people.
clear. It's a very clear demarcation given. The spiritual hierarchy is functional. Just like in the 56 God realized souls, there are different functions. The Majzub doesn't have any function, basically. Paramahamsa alternates between God consciousness and creation consciousness. Jivan Mukta is simultaneously on both levels. But the real work is actually done by the Sadgurus and the three Majzubs, basically. So I believe, from what I understand, is yes, it's a metaphor, but it seems to me very clear that a lot of people could be veiled. So the functional hierarchy could be they have specific functions that they need to execute, because that's how the divine plan is. That I personally believe that each one of us are already predetermined as to what we will attain, whether it's nirvana, which is of course the nirvana is something that is minimum for every soul, because every soul will attain nirvana at the 84th lakh human cycle, kind of thing. And so it's just a matter of which soul is what kind of predetermination is there as to what kind of function they will have in the 56. That's how what I feel. Yeah, Baba.
I think it's not cast in stone. Either side does not have the evidence to support based on the facts, at least that we are reading in these two books right now. So I'll restate the facts and please correct me if I'm wrong. In God Speaks, there is a reference to a functioning hierarchy. So that seems to suggest that it's not just souls that have made progress, but they have a specific role to perform, which supports the theory that the number could be larger than the 7,000. That's one fact that's available. Okay. The second fact, come to discourses now. There's multiple references to millions, but like Sanjay said, the millions could be in the canvas of the broader time and used metaphorically. Both are possible, right? So given these two disparate facts available to us, though it might be reassuring to go with Kama's line to say that it could be millions, there's no conclusive, definitive evidence at this point, is the way I would summarize it.
One time ago, we said after we all got God realization, let's meet in a park along with Meher Baba, and then we can discuss. What did we think about that at that time?
No,
I think
Karthik,
there was mention of wine.
Logic, Karthik,
Yeah.
the two statements what you made now, with that logic, there needs to be some number beyond 7,000, because 7,000 are only functional numbers, functional souls required to keep the system going, as what is told in God Speaks. But there will be some other numbers also available, may not be in millions.
Millions,
We will
exactly.
take the second one also. May not be in millions, but there will be some numbers.
I think that's where we
like
can summarize. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with both Mamaji and Karthik. Yes.
Jai Baba.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just to put some more light, there are about
flashlight or
so many. No, I'm talking about about this the figures that we've been discussing. They from the institution, from the universities, you have so many graduates coming out, or so many engineers passing out. But we do not define the engineer community by the number of engineers who are employed. There may be some engineers who are not yet employed. So probably this is what it is like, using it as an analogy, that, the engineer community is far more than the number of people who are employed. There are others who are not who are unemployed, or also engineers. Jai Baba.
Good point. Good analogy. Very good analogy.
Yeah. Very good analogy. Yes.
Even retired ones. Yes.
Yeah. And engineers not doing engineering stuff, engineering running kirana stores. Yeah. But they are engineers. So that's a good, interesting analogy. So let's continue.
Yeah. Coming back to the flashlight, there was another thought. We were discussing that the flashlight moving deep into us, and we keep seeing more and more light. So in my understanding, the flashlight of consciousness is constant. It is we who are moving towards the flashlight. So if we take the analogy of the spinning of the earth and the revolution of the earth against the sun, which is the infinite, which is the what you call the the halo of consciousness. And if we divide the earth into three, that is the gross, subtle, and mental, So it is how we are spinning towards the sun or towards the consciousness is how we are evolving. That was another thought I wanted to share. Jai Baba.
Yes. Night to dawn and then day, midday. Yes. So the earth is moving, not the sun. So the light or consciousness is constant there. But availability of that consciousness for any activity is dependent on the movement of the earth. So darkness to dawn to light. So darkness is the gross, dawn is the subtle, and then the light is the mental sphere.
Suryastamam, people say Suryastamam. That means Surya appeared in the morning. No, it doesn't appear. It's the earth rotating. Earth is rotating and facing the earth, facing the sun. Good point, Khalid. Good point. Very good point.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
I'll just make this reference.
Karthik,
Yeah.
have you? I saw today in Teams that there is a Trello of Teams itself that is inbuilt.
Yeah, I can add
What
that.
all you have done is through that, or it is?
No, it's not through that.
Yes, I had a confusion in the morning. Okay.
Yeah. This came up as a question earlier. I have not linked the two. Let me try to do that. Yeah, if you link the two, yes, it will show up right there.
Okay.
Okay, so let's continue to the next chapter, 141 page number, and the chapter is called God Realization. So through the planes and then into God Realization we go. So to realize the self is to realize God, is the first subtitle. To arrive at true self-knowledge is to arrive at God realization. God realization is a unique state of consciousness. It is different from all the other states of consciousness because all the other states of consciousness are experienced through the medium of the individual mind. Whereas the state of God consciousness is in no way dependent upon the individual mind or any other medium. A medium is necessary for knowing something other than one's own self. For knowing one's own self, no medium is necessary. I think this whole paragraph is a very, very powerful paragraph.
This is a profound statement, right?
Yeah, but I think the way he builds it up to the last line is what is more powerful. I want to read it again if everybody is okay. To realize the self is to realize God. To arrive at true self-knowledge is to arrive at God realization. God realization is a unique state of consciousness. It is different from all other states of consciousness because all the other states of consciousness are experienced through the medium of the individual mind. Whereas the state of God consciousness is in no way dependent upon the individual mind or any other medium. A medium is necessary for knowing something other than one's own self. For knowing one's own self, no medium is necessary. So again, a gem of communication here.
And an illusion of mind. Yeah, Manonash.
Yes.
A lot of these
Multiple ideas.
Swamijis, when they explain about the self, they say, they compare it with you're wearing a red glasses you see everything that is red in color. That is how our mind is. Because we have this mind, we see everything the mind in a dual nature, the time, space, and all these things. Once we take out these glasses, that is our real self. That reminds me of that statement some of the Swamijis compare our mind to. Very, very powerful. Jai Baba.
Last line, for knowing one's own self, no medium is necessary. So when we say one's own self, what is the point in knowing it? We are already there. That is existence. So the knowing means there is some element of duality attached to that. How do I understand?
Yeah. We have to know the real self with the mind, whatever we have. That is the realization.
No, after the mind.
And then the mind
When
has
we
to
have
go.
dropped the mind,
Mind becomes one with the God. That's it. All the sanskaras will be dropped.
See, up to sixth
Because
plane there
of the
is mind, right?
sanskaras, yeah, because of the sanskaras, we see all these different things. Once the sanskaras are dropped, with the same mind, the consciousness realizes its true real consciousness.
no, when you say that,
we
the
need our
same
mind to
consciousness
understand.
realizes its own true self. There is a play of duality slightly. So when Manonash happens, and then you are God, there is no realization actually, it is existence. That's how I see.
See, that is where the four
Existence.
states came, right? In Everything and Nothing, Baba talked about four states after Manonash. So some people become perfect masters, some people retain their body like Mazoops and the Paramahamsas, and some people give up the whole thing and become one with the God, Mukti, attain the Mukti.
I was reading the latest Glow edition where this mind thing or intellect is, Baba has given the importance to intellect. All faith is based on intellect, and there should be no faith without intellectual conviction. Things which are beyond intellect cannot be grasped or understood by or through intellect, which is finite and unlimited. To understand the finite and unlimited, or to get an intellectual idea of the same, one must first of all assume that they are and they do exist. So this assumption has to be through the intellect. And then one goes beyond the intellect ultimately. Yeah. So, but the intellect is needed to begin with. Up to sixth plane, the intellect will be there, right? As I understand. Yeah. Jai Baba.
See, our limitation comes only with the sanskaras, right? Our limitation comes only with the sanskaras. When all the sanskaras are dropped, then we have no limitation. We become one with the infinite super consciousness.
Right. I think we have to be very careful about knowledge. The highest knowledge comes in Satchitananda, Fanafila, which is infinite knowledge, infinite power, infinite knowledge, infinite bliss, Satchitananda. We have read, as Ravi said, in Everything and the Nothing, there is material knowledge for the material body and material life. There is the spiritual knowledge, which we are imbibing now through God Speaks and Discourses. So then you have divine knowledge. And then there is also knowledge has the opposite, which is ignorance. Even knowledge has to be dropped. Because once you are united with the self, all these things are immaterial because they are part of the illusion. Because we know that from the top-down approach, infinite consciousness or eternal avataric infinite consciousness state 2b and infinite consciousness state 2a, from which we have derived ourselves, including the avatar, is that it's all part of the divine illusion. So, as rightly said, mind is a scaffolding and mind has evolved because the stone doesn't have mind. The stone has rudimentary consciousness. Plant probably, I am not an expert on that, yes. But we know that mind evolves through evolution. And as Doc said, in the human state, we have full and complete consciousness. But this consciousness is contaminated by sanskaric impressions, evolutionary sanskaric impressions, which we call as winding sanskaras. Once you become a human being in the reincarnation state, we are spending sanskaras. And by, I think in this chapter, you will read that, once you start experiencing the opposites of duality, the gross impressions will become finer, subtle impressions, and then to finest mental impressions. So this is the process in which the ego mind is required. So what we need to do is to use the ego mind as our slave rather than becoming slaves to our ego mind, because the Maya is going to take over if we let the ego mind take over our life. So definitely the ego mind has a function right up to the sixth plane, as Sanjay said. But in the end, that also has to be dropped, because this knowledge, spiritual knowledge, is only applicable to the sixth plane. But once sanskaras become zero, then you are in a different plane. Let's say from nirvana to nirvikalpa samadhi, you are actually in the God consciousness state, which is Satchitananda, which is a different kind of infinite knowledge, infinite power, infinite bliss, which has no duality. So I think that also in God Speaks, Baba talks about the limited ego mind, which is the false ego, the false I self, gets transmuted to the real ego, which is basically absolute, infinite, unlimited. So these are all semantic terms which we have to be very careful how we use it in watch context. Jai Baba.
Yeah, I think scaffolding, I think that's the theme. We have to recognize and stick to that from the mind. Scaffolding, the pole vault.
Yes, because Baba talks about the universal mind. Remember, the universal mind only comes when you're in the Sadguru, in the self-realized being state. So we have to be very careful when we are talking about the planes of involution and what kind of mind we are using and what happens in the seventh plane when you have Nirvikalpa Samadhi and you have universal mind, infinite power and so on and so forth.
I have a question.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Come on, what do you mean by careful? I want to pick a fight with you today. What do you mean by careful?
Mean by what?
Well, when we use terminologies and we use certain terminologies and words in a particular context, because we are talking to different people, we are sharing our own experience or how as far as I'm concerned, I'm intellectually understanding all this. And I try to dissect it in such a way that not only I can understand myself, but if I'm able to share it with others, it should be the truth, the way it is. So I think sometimes what happens, we use for the same term different words, and then it confuses people. So we have to be very careful that we use the standard terminology that is used in God Speaks. That's what I meant.
There's nothing we can do. We have to use our own knowledge, and as long as our intention is to help the people with the knowledge, whatever I know, I express it. You may think, hey, you're using wrong words, but I may think that you're also using the wrong words, right? So
Ravi, I never said anything about you using or anything. You yourself are coming here and confessing that you are saying the wrong words. I didn't say anything about anything.
No. I'm trying to
I was just
understand.
explaining the terminologies, and it's not just the right intention. Right intention is not good enough. Discrimination is also important. Vive Vairagya. Everybody has right intention, but they can do the wrong process. Give me a break, man.
No, whatever we say, that's about it. We can. Nobody does purposefully. Let me take them to a wrong direction. Nobody says that. Whatever we believe,
but then if you end up
that,
confusing
right?
the other, also is a problem. In a focus group of learning, and even in general, using the right terms and the right context is, I think, the best way to communicate.
If you say that, Karthik, nobody will speak. If you say that, everybody will shut up. Oh, I may be using
you just have to be
wrong
careful. We use Kama's word. We have to take
Let's ask everybody.
of.
Okay, let's put a voting. Who is careless here in talking? Can we ask everybody? Everybody is careful. Who will say, yeah, I'm saying something, I'm careless? Who will say that? Nobody will say that. So whatever they say, we have to accept it, and it's up to you. You know, whatever you say, that is right. That is right. You cannot say you have to be careful in using the right words. You cannot tell the people. That comes as my ego. If I tell, hey guys, be careful what you say, that's my ego. We better shut our ego and be loving with each other.
Ravi, are you making a confession here about your personality?
I'm talking about the comment you made, Kama. I'm
The
talking
comment
about
was very general. It
be
was not.
careful
It was
what
an
you
impersonal
say.
comment, not directed to anybody. I was just giving my understanding of it. It had nothing to do with criticizing anybody's observation or how they spoke anything. I was just giving my observation, nothing else. I think you are taking it personal. I'm sorry.
Whatever you say.
I apologize in front of everybody. If you think I criticized you, I apologize. Okay?
No,
Forgive and forget.
no, you're wrong. You're wrong. Totally wrong. You're not at all criticizing me. I'm just picking the word. Be careful in what you say. When you say that to the people, there's something to think about.
No, I said let's be careful about the kind of words or semantics we use from God's speech.
I'm not arguing or I'm not saying anything, but I'm just trying to understand what do you mean by we have to be careful in saying what we say that. That's all.
If I can intervene, Ravi and Kama, he is saying that we have to use the word with respect to its sanctity in God speaks and discourses. I think that's what he tries to mean, or that's what Karthik was trying to say. I have a small question. Can I ask?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, please.
Okay. So basically, there is a mention of the use of heart as the medium of communication in the last stages. Now, my question is that, is it when we are moving from the 6th plane to the 7th plane, is that when we just use our heart? Because in the 6th plane, I mean, there is some, they say that the direct connect with the universal force or God, by whatever name you can, is through the heart. So now I'm getting a little confused that that if on the 6th plane there is annihilation, total annihilation, or is it on the is the heart the communication, the bridge between 6th and the 7th plane? Is my question.
As far as I know, heart is the only communication between the God and the human. Nothing else. Intellect, we use it only to understand all the spiritual values, but still, after understanding that, we use it to practice love, to walk in the right path. That is what my take on it, Ashok.
Yeah, no. If anybody else could throw some light on this.
I don't see heart and mind as two separate entities. There is a bit of a shade of difference, but actually mind is in the heart. I read somewhere, I don't remember.
We read in the Avenues of Understanding.
Anyway,
we have to use our mind and the heart, and the heart is always a leader. Mind helps the heart to walk in the spiritual path. And ultimately, love is the only way for our ignorant consciousness to become one with the super consciousness. That's what I understand from Baba's readings.
So heart is supposed to be the vehicle or the vehicle or the medium in the subtle sphere. And when we are moving, my question is very simple: is that when we are moving from the 6th and to the 7th plane, what is the medium or the body, or how do we move from 6th to the 7th? Is my question.
Well,
my
as long as we have samskara.
No, my understanding is dropping all the bodies, including your mind, heart, everything. Then you are in the 7th plane.
Okay. Fair enough.
See, Jai Baba, I think if I understood your question right, Ashok, that, in the sixth plane, we have mentioned that there is only one basic impression that is left is the separation of the subject, spiritual aspirant, who is seeing God everywhere, but he's not united with God. Okay, he's still looking at God as an object. See, in all the literature, spiritual literature, they will always tell you God is not an object of desire. He is your own innermost loving self. But we have to go through this journey of duality to reach non-duality. So coming back to your point, I think the question would be the thinking mind ego and the breathing heart love. Because the mind thinks. And we know that in the fifth plane, the domain of mind is about thoughts. And in the sixth plane, the domain of mind is feelings. And so that mind is still there in the sixth plane. So with the grace of the perfect master, that one sanskaric impression of duality between subject and object is dissolved. And then union happens, which means the mind ego, manonash happen, annihilation of the mind, fana. And basically what you're having is sanskaras become zero, sanskaric impressions, and you reach the super consciousness state, which is nirvana, but you don't see God. Only when you go into nirvikalpa samadhi, you experience God realization. So I think when you speak about God realization is also a word for self-realization. God is the self and self is God. But we should not confuse nirvikalpa samadhi with nirvana, because that is the super consciousness state. That is the first state that every soul will attain. So the medium, there is nothing like a medium. The only thing that required is the grace of a perfect master to remove that last sanskaric impression and you unite with God. Heart is always about intuition, love. So I think the question about heart and mind comes with the material body. So what Baba says is intuitive heart is much more superior than the thinking mind. But there has to be harmony between mind and heart, especially in material life. Yeah, Baba.
So we can just conclude that from the movement from the sixth to seventh plane, it requires the grace of the perfect master. Is that
correct? Yes.
Yeah, that's absolutely needed. Without perfect master's grace, we cannot move. Soul cannot be mingled with God. Cannot get God realization. Yeah, we read it, right? Number of times we read it in both God.
Yeah. I'm just when the movement to the sixth to seventh plane, I'm just trying to reconfirm. Maybe it's that's all.
Okay, so
anyway,
we are almost out of time, so we'll pause at this point. I think everybody needs to take a chill pill here. I think
I love Kama. I still love Kama, but I would like to pick a fight with him once in a way. That's how I feel satisfied.
That was another problem, right? So that's not the right choice of words to start a conversation with, right? So
that is the right word, Karthik. That is the right word. That is the right word. That is the right word.
So that if you say that, you're already the person is expecting a bouncer on the other side, right? So you
pick fight. You pick fight with only people you love, right? I love Kama.
Yeah, absolutely. Dirty all.
Yeah, all right. Ravi is my heart teacher.
Nothing any personal. Okay.
No, I know. Ravi, you're my heart teacher. You make me respond or react to my sanskaras. It has nothing to do with you. So thanks.
Jai Baba.
If we all think like this, we'll be also blessed.
Absolutely, Sanjay. Absolutely. What a long way we have come.
Yeah, the journey will be much faster, double the speed,
Kama's heart is with Ravi and Ravi's mind is with Kama.
Yeah.
We'll have to judge them together.
Jai Baba.
All right. Jai Baba, guys. Have a great
Jai
weekend.
Baba, everyone.
Jai Baba.
We'll catch up.
Jai Baba, everybody have a great weekend. Jai Baba.
Yeah, Jai Baba, everybody.
Same to you.
Jai Baba.
Remember, we did not discuss it this week, but please remember, we are all still on the backbiting challenge, and we'll talk about it next week.
Yes.
Yes, we have to talk about.
Take care. Jai Baba.
Sure.
Thanks for reminding. Thanks for reminding. Jai Baba.
Yeah.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.